The year is 1812, a pivotal moment in history where the young United States stands at a crossroads, its future uncertain and fraught with challenges. Baltimore's harbor bustles with activity. The docks are alive with the sounds of commerce, the clatter of hooves, and the shouts of merchants. Ships, laden with goods, arrive from distant shores. They bring not just cargo, but stories and news from across the seas, connecting America to the wider world. Merchants strike deals, their voices echoing through the crowded wharves. The air is thick with the scent of spices, the tang of salt water, and the promise of profit. Sailors weathered by the sea mend their nets and spin yarns of far-off lands. Their tales of adventure and peril captivate the young and old alike. America, a young nation, brims with the promise of prosperity and growth. Its streets are filled with the energy of a people forging their destiny. Yet beneath the surface of this vibrant scene, a current of unease stirs. The specter of conflict looms, casting a shadow over the bustling port. The relationship with Great Britain, the former colonial master, has grown increasingly strained, casting a shadow over the nation's future. Tensions rise as diplomatic efforts falter. The United States, barely 3 decades old, finds itself caught in a tug-of-war between the two great powers of the age, Great Britain and France, each vying for dominance, each pulling America in different directions. As these European titans clash on land and sea, American neutrality becomes increasingly untenable. The seas, once a source of commerce, now threaten to become a battleground. British ships, desperate for manpower, stop American vessels and impress American sailors into service, claiming them as deserters from the Royal Navy. This act of aggression stokes the fires of anger and resentment. This insult to American sovereignty, coupled with British restrictions on American trade, fans the flames of resentment and pushes the nation closer to the brink of war. The cries for justice grow louder. In the taverns and coffee houses of Baltimore, heated debates rage over the nation's course. Voices rise in passionate argument, each side convinced of their righteousness. Federalists, particularly those in the merchant class with strong ties to Britain, urge restraint and accommodation. They fear the economic repercussions of war. War, they argue, would be disastrous for the fledgling nation's economy. The cost, both in lives and treasure, could be too great to bear. But the Democratic Republicans, led by the fiery James Madison, argue that the time for appeasement is over. They call for action, for a stand against tyranny. America, they declare, must stand up for its rights and honor, even if it means going to war. The call to arms resonates through the streets, stirring the hearts of many. The air crackles with tension, a palpable sense of dread mixing with the salty tang of the sea. The horizon darkens, mirroring the nation's uncertain future. As the sun sets, casting long shadows across the harbor, the fate of the nation hangs in the balance. The decisions made in the coming days will shape the course of history. The year is 1812, and the United States stands on the precipice of war. The choices of its leaders and the resolve of its people will determine its destiny. The roots of the War of 1812 ran deep, entangled in the complex web of international relations and the lingering resentment of a former colony. The Napoleonic Wars raging across Europe had a profound impact on the young United States. Both Great Britain and France, locked in a deadly struggle for supremacy, sought to impose their will on the high seas, often at the expense of American neutrality. Great Britain, with its powerful Royal Navy, implemented a policy of impressment, stopping American ships and forcibly conscripting sailors they deemed British subjects. Thousands of American sailors, many of whom had been born in the newly formed nation, were snatched from their ships and forced to serve on British warships. This practice, a blatant violation of American sovereignty, ignited outrage across the United States. Adding fuel to the fire were the British Orders in Council, a series of maritime regulations that severely restricted American trade with France. These orders, designed to cripple Napoleon's war effort, had a devastating impact on the American economy, particularly in the shipping centers of New England. American merchants, caught in the crossfire of a European war, saw their profits dwindle and their ships seized. The combination of impressment and trade restrictions created a potent brew of resentment and anger. Americans, already sensitive to perceived slights from their former colonial master, bristled at what they saw as British arrogance and disregard for their rights as a sovereign nation. The stage was set for a confrontation, a clash of wills that would test the mettle of the young republic. The impressment of American sailors into the Royal Navy was a festering wound on the national psyche, a constant source of humiliation and anger. This practice, which saw American seamen forcibly taken from their ships and pressed into British service, was not just a violation of personal freedom, but a direct affront to the sovereignty of the young American nation. For American sailors, the open ocean had become a perilous place, where the threat of capture and forced service loomed large. Every voyage carried the risk of encountering a British warship, and with it, the possibility of being torn from their lives and thrust into a harsh and unforgiving existence. Imagine yourself aboard a merchant vessel, the salt spray stinging your face, the creak of the rigging a familiar lullaby. The sea, once a place of adventure and livelihood, now holds a sinister threat. The horizon, instead of promising new opportunities, hides potential dangers that could change your life forever. Suddenly, a shot rings out across the waves. The calm is shattered, and the reality of the threat becomes all too real. A British warship, sails billowing, bears down on your ship. The sight of the Union Jack strikes fear into the hearts of the crew, knowing that their fate is no longer in their own hands. Armed boarding parties swarm aboard, their faces grim, their cutlasses glinting in the sunlight. The air is thick with tension as they move with practiced efficiency, leaving no corner of the ship unchecked. They demand to inspect the crew, searching for deserters from the Royal Navy. The inspection is invasive and humiliating, a stark reminder of the power imbalance at play. But their definition of deserter is loose, encompassing any sailor they deem British, regardless of birthplace or documentation. This broad interpretation means that many innocent men are caught in their net, their protests ignored. Protests are met with threats, pleas for mercy with scorn. The British sailors are unyielding, their authority absolute in these moments of confrontation. You watch helplessly as your shipmates, friends, even family members are dragged away in chains, their fate uncertain. The bonds of camaraderie and kinship are severed in an instant, replaced by a deep sense of loss and helplessness. The lucky ones might spend years toiling in the cramped, disease-ridden bowels of British warships. These conditions are harsh and unforgiving, a far cry from the freedom they once knew. Others might face the lash, their bodies broken from minor infractions. The brutality of naval discipline leaves lasting scars, both physical and psychological. Some might even die in battle, fighting for a cause they do not believe in, against a nation they do not consider their enemy. The ultimate sacrifice made under duress adds to the tragedy of their plight. The stories of these impressed sailors, circulated widely in newspapers and taverns, fueled anti-British sentiment and strengthened the resolve of those who called for war. These tales of injustice and suffering resonated deeply with the American public, galvanizing support for a stand against British tyranny. The Chesapeake Leopard Affair of 1807 brought the issue of impressment to a boiling point. This incident, more than any other, highlighted the brazen disregard the British had for American sovereignty. The USS Chesapeake, an American frigate, was stopped off the coast of Virginia by the HMS Leopard, a British warship. The confrontation was a stark display of British naval dominance and American vulnerability. When the American captain refused to allow a search for deserters, the Leopard opened fire, killing 3 American sailors and wounding 18 others. The attack was unprovoked and brutal, leaving the Chesapeake crippled and its crew demoralized. The Chesapeake, unprepared for battle, was forced to surrender. The humiliation of this defeat was felt across the nation, a stark reminder of the ongoing threat posed by British impressment. 4 sailors were seized, and the ship was allowed to limp back to port, a symbol of American humiliation. This event, among others, stoked the fires of resentment and pushed the United States closer to the brink of war with Britain. As tensions with Great Britain escalated, the United States found itself deeply divided along regional and ideological lines. The country was grappling with internal conflicts that threatened to tear it apart. The roots of these divisions ran deep, influenced by economic interests, political ideologies, and regional loyalties. The Federalist Party, concentrated primarily in New England, opposed war, arguing that it would be economically ruinous and would only serve to strengthen Napoleon, whom they viewed as a greater threat to American interests than Great Britain. They believed that engaging in war would disrupt the fragile economy and lead to unnecessary loss of life. The Federalists, many of whom had strong economic ties to Britain, favored diplomacy and accommodation. They saw the benefits of maintaining peaceful trade relations with Britain, which was a significant trading partner, and feared the economic consequences of a prolonged conflict. They argued that the British orders in council, while harmful, were a necessary evil in the fight against Napoleonic tyranny. The Federalists believed that these measures, though restrictive, were justified in the broader context of the global struggle against Napoleon's ambitions. The Democratic Republican Party, led by President James Madison and Thomas Jefferson, took a more hawkish stance. They were determined to assert American sovereignty and were willing to go to war to defend the nation's honor and independence. They viewed the British actions as an intolerable affront to American sovereignty and argued that war was necessary to defend the nation's honor and independence. The Democratic Republicans believed that failing to respond to British provocations would undermine the young nation's credibility on the world stage. The Democratic Republicans, with their power base in the South and West, were less reliant on trade with Great Britain and more concerned with westward expansion, which they saw as being threatened by British support for Native American tribes on the frontier. They believed that British interference was hindering the nation's manifest destiny and the right to expand its territory. The debate over war raged in newspapers, pamphlets, and public forums. Public opinion was sharply divided, with passionate arguments on both sides. The media of the time played a crucial role in shaping public perception and influencing the political discourse. Federalists accused the Democratic Republicans of warmongering and of being puppets of Napoleon. They claimed that the push for war was driven by ulterior motives and that it would ultimately serve foreign interests rather than the American people. Democratic Republicans countered by accusing the Federalists of being unpatriotic and of valuing their economic interests over the nation's honor. They argued that the Federalists were willing to compromise American principles for the sake of profit and were not committed to the nation's long-term security. The nation seemed to be tearing itself apart, the bonds of union strained to the breaking point. The political and regional divisions were so severe that it appeared the country might not withstand the internal pressures. In the halls of Congress, the debate over war was just as heated. Lawmakers were deeply divided, with intense arguments and passionate speeches echoing through the chambers. Federalist representatives, particularly those from New England, threatened secession if war was declared. They felt that their region's economic interests were being sacrificed for a conflict they did not support. They argued that the Constitution did not give the federal government the power to wage war against the will of the states. This raised fundamental questions about the balance of power between the federal government and the states. The Democratic Republicans, however, held a slim majority in both houses of Congress. This narrow advantage allowed them to push forward their agenda despite fierce opposition. They argued that the British actions left them no choice but to fight for the nation's survival. The ongoing British naval blockade and other aggressive measures were seen as direct threats that could not be ignored.